Hi, my name is Frank Schaeffer, and I am a writer and author of fiction and nonfiction and a painter. And I come from a religious right background, raised in an evangelical subculture. In fact, raised by what the New York Times once referred to as evangelical royalty when they did an article on me, because my father, Francis Schaeffer, was a very famous evangelical author and one of the leaders of the religious right. In fact, a founder of the religious right, and I was his nepotistic sidekick in the 70s and 80s. And from there, it's been a long journey fleeing from the religious right and from what I call certainty addiction that I was raised on, a sort of an environment of what a friend of mine calls overbelief. Today, I'm looking at what's happened to America with Donald Trump through the eyes of sorrow, both personal and for my country as an American citizen. The personal is a sort of a quirky story. You know, I put a couple notes on my Facebook page about some baby birds I rescued this spring, and one of them that I called Athena with my grandchildren, a little grackle, was doing very well, but her broken wing healed in a sort of an odd position. It was broken when her nest was attacked by other birds and she fell from the nest. And yesterday I put her outside to hop around. She enjoyed flying into the trees. Not a good flyer, but could get there. And wondering what to do with her for the rest of her life. She didn't really like being in a cage, and yet when she was outside, she was quite vulnerable, kind of a tough choice. Well, that choice, that question, got answered when a peregrine falcon came down out of the air like a streak of lightning and took her. And this little hand-reared bird was no more. She had been returned to the natural cycle and order of things, which, whatever else you think about nature, lacks sentimentality. We may have empathy, but nature itself does not. The real world is often very different from our hopes and dreams about it. What better illustration of that than what Donald Trump has been doing recently in coddling and seemingly endorsing the neo-Nazis and the fascists that marched in Charlottesville, one of whom allegedly murdered with his car a counter-protester who was standing up for everything that I believe in, and I think a lot of other Americans believe in terms of liberty and freedom and surviving and living together. What a difference between our sentimental view of our country and the reality of it. Well, Donald Trump flip-flopped, and at first he seemed to coddle the alt-right and the neo-Nazis and the Ku Klux Klan, and then he was forced, probably by people like General Kelly and others, to get up and make a statement that sounded more presidential, denouncing them. But then at a press conference, he flip-flopped again, as he's wont to do, doubled down, and stuck with his original take on the situation, which was, this is everybody's fault. And he even blamed the alt-left, trying to coin a term like fake news to excuse his views, as if somehow this was a level playing field, and neo-Nazis and a lynch mob killing a black man or whatever it might be was all kind of the same as violent left-wingers who, you know, in his imagination are equally to blame on many sides, as he put it. And then kind of he had a throwaway line saying, well, what's next? Maybe they'll be tearing down monuments of Thomas Jefferson or George Washington. And in fact, unintentionally, he brought up a real point. And that is that the United States of America, unlike Germany after the Second World War, has never had the equivalent of what we did to Germany and the new democratic governments in Germany did to themselves, and that is a conscious denazification program. We've never done that with slavery. So the South is dotted with monuments to not just slaveholders, but people who committed treason. And in most cultures, all would have been hanged, every last man of them, for turning against their own country and attacking our nation. That's what the Civil War was. It was an act of treason by anybody's book, aside even from the slavery issue. So the fact of the matter is, when Donald Trump said, well, what's next? Thomas Jefferson, actually, that's a good question. Why do we have a Jefferson Memorial? Jefferson raped his 14-year-old slave, a young black girl, a child, got her pregnant, and didn't even free his own slave children that he had sired by raping his own slaves and making this one slave in particular his mistress. And we have a monument to him. And people say, well, those were the times and they didn't know better. Oh, yes, they did. Have you ever read Abigail Adams' letters? John Adams' wife's correspondence with Jefferson and others, bewailing their view of slavery? There were plenty of people alive at that time who had the same views that Martin Luther King had when it came to race. It wasn't, oh, those times were different and they didn't know any better. So why do we have monuments to these people? America needs its own denazification program, and that denazification program has to start with people like General Kelly and all these other white oligarchs and women as well who have dishonored themselves by working with this racist thug, this Nazi coddling pig who calls himself President of the United States, should resign en masse and have nothing more to do with him and leave him totally alone. The game is over. The Republican Party has coddled and gone along with its own neo-Nazi. His name is Donald Trump. He has a family history of racism going back to when the Nixon administration had to sue to get him and his bigoted father to allow black people to rent properties from them. This is the original birther. This is the man who equates neo-Nazi torch-lit parades where they yell, blood and soil, and we won't let the Jews take over, with people who oppose them. People who, in the case of Charlottesville, were murdered and run down by a domestic terrorist, copying the technique of radical Islamic terrorism to unleash it on a white woman protester. So much for White Lives Matter. This piece of vermin in the White House should not have any upstanding American in his administration. Anyone who works with Donald Trump is themselves now coddling the alt-right, the neo-Nazis, the Ku Klux Klan. You have no choice, Republicans. If you do not get rid of this president, not only is history going to demolish the Republican Party, but you will go down in history as someone who does with Donald Trump, this racist swine, what Donald Trump does with the alt-right, the neo-Nazis, and the KKK. There are only one set of choices here. You're part of this or you're not part of it. Thank you. My name is Frank Schaeffer.